The dust devil rose from the desert floor like a ghost, and through its swirling veil, Cole Maddox watched a woman carrying 2 wooden buckets suspended from a yoke across her shoulders. Her figure bent against the weight as she trudged along the sun-baked road, leading toward the small homestead 3 miles from town. It was late August in 1882, and the Arizona Territory was suffering through one of the worst droughts anyone could remember, turning the land into a cracked and unforgiving expanse that tested every soul who dared call it home. Cole had been riding fence line for the Triple Bar Ranch when he first noticed her, and over the past week, he had seen her make this same journey every single day, walking 6 miles round trip just to fill those buckets at the only working well in the settlement of Copper Springs. He reined in his horse, a sturdy buckskin mare named Daisy, and wiped the sweat from his brow with his bandana. The woman disappeared over a rise in the road, her dark hair tied back with a faded blue ribbon, her simple calico dress plastered to her back with perspiration. Cole was 26 years old, a veteran ranch hand who had been working cattle since he was 14, and he had seen plenty of hardship in his life. But something about watching that solitary figure carrying water under the merciless sun stirred something deep in his chest, a feeling he could not quite name, but could not ignore either. Cole had arrived in Copper Springs 6 months earlier, drifting in from New Mexico after a bad winter had killed off half the herd he had been tending. The Triple Bar was a decent outfit, run by a fair-minded rancher named Tom Westerly, who paid his men on time and did not work them to death. Cole had a small cabin on the ranch property, a roof over his head, 3 meals a day, and enough money to save a little each month. He considered himself fortunate, especially compared to some of the other drifters and cowboys he had known over the years, who ended up broke and broken by the harsh realities of frontier life. But the woman with the water buckets occupied his thoughts as he rode back to the ranch that evening. He unsaddled Daisy, rubbed her down, and made sure she had feed and water before heading to the bunkhouse to wash up for supper. The other ranch hands were already gathered around the long wooden table when he arrived, passing platters of beef, beans, and biscuits while they talked about the day's work and complained about the heat. "You look like you got something on your mind, Maddox," said Pete Harrigan, an older cowboy with a weathered face and gray whiskers. "Got lady troubles?" Cole shook his head and filled his plate. "Just thinking about the drought. Saw someone hauling water from town today. Must be rough for the homesteaders out there without their own wells." "That would be the Miller widow," said another hand named Jack Reeves. "Heard her husband died last year from a rattlesnake bite. Left her with that little piece of land and a house that is barely standing. She has been trying to make a go of it on her own, but I do not know how much longer she can last." "She walks 6 miles every day for water?" Cole asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Every single day," Pete confirmed. "Somebody said she grows vegetables in a small garden and sells them in town when she can. But without a reliable water source, she is fighting a losing battle. Name is Grace Miller. She is about 23 or 24, I think. Pretty thing, but keeps to herself mostly." Cole absorbed this information in silence, chewing his food without really tasting it. Grace Miller. The name fit her somehow, elegant and simple at the same time. He found himself wondering what she looked like up close, whether her eyes were as determined as her stride suggested, whether she ever smiled despite the burden she carried. That night, lying in his bunk with his hands behind his head, Cole stared at the ceiling and listened to the snores and breathing of the other men around him. He had never been one to insert himself into other people's business, preferring to keep his head down and his focus on his work. But the image of Grace Miller walking those miles under the brutal sun would not leave him alone. He knew what it was like to struggle, to face obstacles that seemed insurmountable, and he knew that pride often kept people from asking for help, even when they desperately needed it. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Cole had made a decision. He ate breakfast quickly, saddled Daisy, and rode out before his regular duties began. He found Tom Westerly in the ranch office, going over ledgers and bills of sale. "Boss, I need to ask you something," Cole said, removing his hat as he stood in the doorway. Tom looked up, his keen blue eyes studying Cole with interest. "What is it, Maddox?" "I heard about the widow Miller, who has been hauling water from town every day. I was wondering if you would let me take a few days to dig her a well. I know how to do it, learned from my father back in Kansas. I would do it on my own time, would not interfere with my work here." Tom leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "That is a mighty generous offer. What is she to you?" "Nothing," Cole said honestly. I just do not think it is right, her having to work that hard when someone could help. I am not looking for anything in return. I just want to do something decent. A slow smile spread across Tom's face. You know what, Maddox? I like the way you think. Tell you what, you take 3 days and dig that well. I will even lend you the equipment and pay you for the time. Consider it the ranch doing a good deed. We have been fortunate this year, despite the drought, and it is only right to help out a neighbor. Cole felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that more than I can say. Just one condition, Tom added. You tell her the ranch is helping out, not just you. I do not want her feeling like she owes you personally. Women can be funny about that sort of thing, especially widows trying to maintain their independence. Cole nodded, understanding the wisdom in that approach. Yes, sir, I will make that clear. He spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies, a sturdy shovel, a pickaxe, timber for shoring up the well shaft, rope, buckets, and a tripod for hauling up dirt and eventually water. He loaded everything into a wagon and headed out toward the Miller homestead, following the directions Tom had given him. The property was even more modest than he had imagined. The house was a small wooden structure with a sagging porch and a roof that clearly needed repairs. A few scraggly chickens pecked in the dirt yard, and a vegetable garden struggled valiantly against the parched earth. Split-rail fencing marked the boundaries of the land, and a lean-to served as a makeshift barn for a single mule that looked almost as weary as its owner. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, his heart beating faster than it should. He walked up to the porch and knocked on the door, which hung slightly crooked on its hinges. For a long moment, there was no response. Then he heard light footsteps, and the door opened a crack. A woman's face appeared, wary and guarded, and Cole found himself looking into the darkest brown eyes he had ever seen. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low and cautious. "Mrs. Miller, my name is Cole Maddox. I work for the Triple Bar Ranch. Mr. Westerly sent me out here to dig you a well, if you will allow it. He heard about your situation and wants to help out. There would be no charge to you, nothing expected in return." Grace Miller's eyes widened, and she opened the door a bit more. Cole could see her more clearly now, and Pete had been right when he called her pretty. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fancy clothes or careful grooming. Her face was sun-bronzed and honest, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and her hands showed the calluses and wear of hard work. "Why would Mr. Westerly do that?" she asked, suspicion evident in her tone. "Because it is the decent thing to do," Cole said simply. "No one should have to haul water 6 miles every day. I know how to dig wells, and I have the equipment and the time. If you will let me, I would like to start today." Grace studied him for a long moment, and Cole could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. Pride warred with practicality, independence with desperation. Finally, she stepped out onto the porch, crossing her arms over her chest. "I cannot pay you," she said. "I can barely keep food on my own table. I already told you, there is no charge. This is just one neighbor helping another. That is how things are supposed to work out here." She bit her lip, looking past him at the wagon loaded with equipment. "Where would you dig it?" Cole turned and surveyed the property with an experienced eye. "I would need to do some divining to find the best spot, but I am thinking somewhere between the house and the garden. That way you would have easy access from both places." "Divining?" Grace asked, a hint of skepticism in her voice. "Water witching, some people call it. I use a forked willow branch to locate underground water. My father taught me, and it has never failed me yet." Grace was quiet for another moment, then she nodded slowly. "All right, Mr. Maddox. If Mr. Westerly is truly offering this kindness, I would be a fool to refuse. Thank you." The gratitude in her voice was mixed with something else, perhaps a touch of resignation at having to accept help. Cole understood that feeling. He had been there himself more than once. "You can call me Cole," he said, offering a small smile. "Mr. Maddox was my father." The corner of Grace's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Then you can call me Grace." Cole spent the next hour cutting a forked branch from a willow tree that grew near a dry creek bed at the edge of the property. When he returned, Grace was working in her garden, trying to coax life from plants that drooped in the heat. He held the forked branch loosely in his hands, the two ends pointing upward, and began to walk slowly across the property. Grace stopped her work and watched him, shading her eyes against the sun. Cole concentrated on the subtle pull of the branch, the way it wanted to dip toward the earth when water ran beneath. He walked back and forth in a grid pattern, patient and methodical. Finally, about 30 feet from the house and 20 feet from the garden, the branch dipped sharply downward, pulling so hard it nearly twisted out of his grip. "Here," he called out. "This is the spot." Grace walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be. The pull was strong. There is water down there, probably not too deep either." Cole unloaded his tools and began to mark out a circle about 4 feet in diameter. The ground was hard as stone from the drought, and the first few inches took considerable effort with the pickaxe. Sweat poured down his face and soaked through his shirt, but he worked steadily, breaking up the earth and then shoveling it out. Grace brought him a dipper of water from her precious supply, and he accepted it gratefully. "Thank you," he said, drinking deeply. "It is the least I can do," she replied. "Would you like something to eat? I do not have much, but I could make you some cornbread." "I brought some food with me, but I would not turn down cornbread if you are offering," Cole said with a grin. She returned to the house, and Cole went back to work. By midday he had dug down about 3 feet, and the hole was becoming deep enough that he needed to set up the tripod and bucket system to haul out the dirt. The sun beat down mercilessly, and even with periodic water breaks, Cole felt the heat sapping his strength. Grace emerged from the house carrying a plate with cornbread and some cold beans. "You should take a rest," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "You will make yourself sick working in this heat." Cole climbed out of the hole and sat in the shade of the wagon, accepting the food gratefully. "This is good," he said after the first bite. "Really good." "Thank you," Grace said, sitting down a respectable distance away. "My mother taught me to cook before she died. It is one of the few skills I have that seems useful out here." "How long have you been on your own?" Cole asked, then immediately worried he was being too forward. "I am sorry. That is none of my business." "It is all right," Grace said quietly. "My husband Samuel died 14 months ago. We had only been married 2 years. He was bitten by a rattlesnake while he was checking on the mule. By the time I got him into town, it was too late." "I am sorry," Cole said, and he meant it. He could hear the grief in her voice, still raw despite the passage of time. "We came out here from Missouri with such hopes," Grace continued, staring out at the parched landscape. "Samuel had heard there was good land to be had, and we thought we could build a life. We were doing all right until the well dried up last spring. Samuel kept saying he would dig a new one, but there was always something else that needed doing first. And then he was gone, and I was alone." "You have family back in Missouri?" Cole asked. Grace shook her head. "My parents died of cholera when I was 17. Samuel was all I had. His family did not approve of our marriage, so we left and came west." She glanced at him. "What about you? What brought you to Arizona?" Cole shrugged. "Restlessness, mostly. I have been drifting since my parents died when I was 18. Worked ranches all over, from Texas to Montana. Never stayed anywhere too long, never put down roots. Just kept moving, I guess." "That sounds lonely," Grace observed. "It is," Cole admitted, surprised at his own honesty. "But it is also easier sometimes. No ties, no expectations, no one depending on you." "Or no one to depend on," Grace added softly. Their eyes met, and Cole felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition of shared loneliness and resilience. He looked away first, finishing his cornbread and standing up. "I should get back to work," he said. "I want to make as much progress as possible today." Grace gathered the plate and headed back to the house. "I will bring you more water in a bit." Cole worked through the afternoon, the hole growing steadily deeper. At 6 feet down, the earth became slightly damper, which was an encouraging sign. At 8 feet, the soil was definitely moist. His muscles ached and his hands were blistered despite his calluses, but he pushed on, driven by a determination he did not fully understand. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Cole reluctantly called it a day. He had reached a depth of nearly 10 feet, and he would need to shore up the sides before going much deeper to prevent a collapse. Grace came out as he was packing up his tools. "You accomplished a lot today," she said, peering down into the hole. "We are getting there," Cole replied. "Tomorrow I will timber the sides and keep digging. If the water table is where I think it is, we should hit it by the end of the day." "I do not know how to thank you," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is more kindness than I have known in a long time." "You do not need to thank me," Cole said. "Just doing what is right." He climbed onto the wagon and picked up the reins. "I will be back early tomorrow." Grace raised her hand in farewell, and Cole drove away, glancing back once to see her still standing there, a solitary figure against the darkening sky. That night, Cole found himself thinking about Grace long after he should have been asleep. He thought about the sadness in her eyes, the way her hands had trembled slightly when she handed him the water dipper, the strength it must take to keep going day after day in the face of such hardship. He thought about how she had looked standing in her garden, refusing to give up despite the drought and the loneliness and the loss. And he realized, with a mixture of surprise and inevitability, that he was beginning to care about her in a way that went beyond simple compassion for a neighbor in need. The next morning, Cole arrived at the Miller homestead just after dawn, the wagon loaded with cut timber for shoring up the well shaft. Grace was already awake, tending her chickens and carrying water to her struggling garden. She looked up when she heard the wagon and waved, a gesture that made Cole's heart lift in a way that both pleased and unsettled him. "You are here early," she called out. "Wanted to beat the worst of the heat," Cole replied, climbing down from the wagon. "The deeper I dig, the more careful I have to be. Do not want the whole thing caving in on me." Grace frowned with concern. "Is it dangerous?" "Can be, if you are not careful," Cole admitted. "But I have done this before. I know what to watch for." He spent the first few hours of the morning carefully installing timber supports inside the well shaft, creating a solid framework that would prevent the earthen walls from collapsing. It was exacting work that required constant attention to detail. Grace brought him breakfast, insisting he eat something substantial before continuing. "You are taking care of me, so the least I can do is make sure you do not starve," she said, handing him a plate of eggs and biscuits. "These are from your chickens?" Cole asked, savoring the fresh eggs. "They are. Not laying as much as they should with the heat, but we make do." Cole noticed she said "we" as if she were including him in that category, and the observation warmed him. After eating, he descended back into the well and continued digging. The earth was definitely wetter now, and he could smell the mineral scent of underground water. His anticipation grew with every shovel full. At around 2 in the afternoon, when Cole was nearly 15 feet down, his shovel hit something that was not dirt. Water began to seep up around his boots, slowly at first, and then with increasing speed. He let out a whoop of triumph and called up to Grace, who had been weeding her garden nearby. "We hit water!" Grace rushed over to the well and peered down, her face alight with excitement. "Truly? You found it? Come see for yourself." Cole climbed up out of the well, mud coating his boots and the legs of his trousers. Grace knelt at the edge and looked down into the darkness, where water was beginning to pool at the bottom, reflecting the circle of sky above like a mirror. "Oh, my lord," she whispered, "there is really water down there." "Give it a few hours to fill up, and you will have a proper well," Cole said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "I will need to build up the sides above ground, install a windlass for the bucket, and put a cover on it to keep debris out. But the hard part is done." Grace stood up, and to Cole's surprise, her eyes were bright with tears. "I do not know what to say. This changes everything. I can water my garden properly. I can do laundry. I can bathe without using up all my drinking water. I can actually have a life here again." Without thinking, she threw her arms around Cole in an impulsive hug. He stood frozen for a moment, startled by the contact, and then carefully placed his arms around her in return. She was smaller than he had realized, her head barely reaching his shoulder, and he could feel her trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she said against his chest. "Thank you so much." "You are welcome," Cole said softly, very aware of how right she felt in his arms. Grace seemed to realize what she had done and pulled back abruptly, her cheeks flushing with color. "I apologize. That was inappropriate of me." "No need to apologize," Cole said gently. "I am just glad I could help." They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Grace cleared her throat and stepped back further. "Let me get you something cold to drink. You have earned it." While Grace went to the house, Cole began the work of constructing the above-ground portion of the well. He built up the sides with stones he gathered from around the property, mortaring them together with mud to create a sturdy wall about 3 feet high. He fashioned a wooden cover, and installed a simple windlass mechanism with a crank handle and rope for lowering and raising a bucket. By the time the sun was setting, the well was complete and functional. Cole demonstrated how to use it for Grace, cranking the handle to lower the bucket into the water below and then hauling it back up, brimming and cold and clear. Grace took the bucket with both hands and dipped out a cup of water. She drank deeply, then closed her eyes with an expression of pure bliss. "It tastes wonderful, clean and cold and wonderful. Best water in Arizona," Cole said with a grin. Grace poured another cup and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and Cole felt a jolt of awareness run through him. He drank the water without tasting it, too conscious of Grace watching him. "Will you stay for supper?" she asked. "I know it is late, but I would like to cook you a proper meal as thanks. I have a chicken I can prepare, and some vegetables from the garden." Cole knew he should decline, knew that spending more time with Grace would only deepen the attachment he was already feeling, but he found himself nodding anyway. "I would like that very much." They walked to the house together, and Grace set about preparing the meal while Cole washed up at the new well, scrubbing the dirt and sweat from his hands and face. The sun had disappeared below the horizon, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the small house, Grace lit oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the simple furnishings. There was a cast-iron stove, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, and a bed in the corner covered with a faded quilt. Everything was clean and neat, despite the obvious poverty. Cole sat at the table and watched Grace work, her movements efficient and graceful as she prepared the food. She hummed softly to herself, a tune he did not recognize, and he found himself memorizing every detail of this moment. The way the lamplight caught in her dark hair, the small smile that played at the corners of her mouth, the sense of peace that filled the humble space. "Tell me about Kansas," Grace said as she worked. "What was it like growing up there?" "Flat," Cole said with a laugh. "Endless prairie in every direction. My father had a small farm, mostly wheat and corn. We had a few head of cattle, some pigs, chickens. It was a hard life, but a good one. My mother kept a big garden and canned everything in sight for the winter. They were good people, my parents." "How did they die?" Grace asked gently. "Influenza. Swept through our county one winter and took a lot of folks. I was 18, old enough to be on my own, but young enough to feel lost without them. I sold the farm to a neighbor and headed west. Been moving ever since." "Do you ever think about settling down? Having your own place?" Cole considered the question. "I used to think I was not the settling type, but lately I have been wondering if maybe I was just looking for the right reason to stop moving." Grace glanced at him, and their eyes met across the small kitchen. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of possibility. Grace served the meal, and they ate together in companionable silence broken by occasional conversation. The chicken was tender and flavorful, the vegetables fresh despite the drought, and Cole could not remember when he had enjoyed a meal more. "You are a wonderful cook," he said. "That is not just talk. You really have a gift." Grace smiled, and Cole realized it was the first time he had seen her truly smile. It transformed her face, made her look younger and unburdened. "Thank you. I enjoy cooking when I have something decent to work with." After dinner, Cole helped her wash the dishes, standing beside her at the dry sink while she washed and he dried. It felt domestic and comfortable, like something they had been doing together for years rather than just meeting 2 days before. When the dishes were put away, Cole knew he should leave, but he found himself reluctant to break the spell of the evening. "I should get back to the ranch," he said finally. "Early day tomorrow." "Of course," Grace said, walking him to the door. "Thank you again, Cole, for everything. You have given me back my life." The well was the ranch's doing, Cole reminded her, though they both knew he was being modest. "I just provided the labor." "Then thank you for the labor," Grace said softly. "And for the company. It has been a long time since I had someone to talk to." Cole put on his hat and stepped out onto the porch. The night was cool after the heat of the day, and the sky was brilliant with stars. "I will come by in a few days if that is all right, just to make sure the well is working properly." "I would like that," Grace said. Cole climbed onto the wagon and drove away, and as before, he looked back to see Grace standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the lamplight behind her. Over the next several weeks, Cole found excuses to visit the Miller homestead. He told himself he was just checking on the well, making sure it continued to produce good water, but he knew the truth. He was going to see Grace, and each time he visited, their connection grew stronger. Grace's garden flourished with reliable water, and she began bringing fresh vegetables to sell in Copper Springs. The extra income, modest though it was, made a real difference in her circumstances. Her chickens laid more eggs with adequate water available, and she started selling those as well. Slowly but surely, Grace was building a sustainable life for herself. Cole helped with repairs around the property, fixing the sagging porch, patching the roof, reinforcing the fence. He never asked permission, just showed up with materials and tools and got to work. Grace protested at first, worried about taking advantage of his kindness, but Cole waved off her concerns. "I enjoy working with my hands," he told her, "and I enjoy your company. Consider it a fair trade." They fell into an easy friendship marked by long conversations and comfortable silences. Grace told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her dreams of having children and a real home. Cole shared stories from his years of drifting, the places he had seen and the people he had known. They discovered shared interest in books and music, though neither had much opportunity to indulge those interests in their current circumstances. One evening in late September, as the brutal heat finally began to ease, Cole arrived to find Grace sitting on her newly repaired porch, staring out at the sunset with a pensive expression. "Everything all right?" he asked, settling onto the porch step beside her chair. "I have been thinking," Grace said slowly, "about Samuel." Cole waited, not wanting to push her, but willing to listen. "I loved him," Grace continued. "But if I am being honest, we married young, and perhaps for the wrong reasons. I was alone after my parents died, and he offered security and companionship. He was a good man, but we did not really know each other. Not deeply." "I am sorry," Cole said, not sure what else to offer. Grace looked at him, her dark eyes serious. "I am telling you this because I do not want there to be any confusion between us. I cared for Samuel, and I mourned him. But I am also realizing that I have been so lonely, and now you have come into my life, and I find myself feeling things I did not expect to feel." Cole's heart began to pound. "What kind of things?" "The kind where I look forward to your visits more than anything else in my week. The kind where I find myself thinking about you when you are not here. The kind where I wonder what it would be like if you stayed." Cole stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the railing. Grace's words had been standing in front of him. "Grace, I need you to know something. I did not come here looking for this. I genuinely just wanted to help you with the well. But somewhere along the way, I started falling for you, and I have been fighting it because I did not want to presume anything or make you uncomfortable." Grace rose from her chair and came to stand beside him. "You have made me feel alive again, Cole. You have made me believe that maybe I could have more than just survival, that maybe I could have happiness." Cole turned to face her, and without another word, he reached out and cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "I do not have much to offer you. I am just a ranch hand with a small salary and no property of my own. But I can promise you that I will work hard and treat you right and do everything in my power to make you happy." "That is everything I want," Grace whispered. Cole leaned down and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that sent electricity coursing through his entire body. Grace kissed him back, her arms sliding around his neck, and Cole felt like he had finally found the place he was meant to be. They drew apart slowly, both slightly breathless. "I should probably court you properly," Cole said. "Take you to church socials and such." Grace laughed, a sound of pure joy. "I think we have been courting for weeks now, without realizing it. But yes, I would like that. I would like to do this right." Over the following months, Cole and Grace became an established couple in Copper Springs. They attended Sunday services together at the small church in town, went to community gatherings, and gradually built a life that included both of them. Cole was still working at the Triple Bar, but Tom Westerly had noticed his foreman was getting older and had started training Cole to take over those duties eventually. "You have proven yourself to be responsible and trustworthy," Tom told him one day. "And now that you have a reason to stay put, I want to make sure you know there is a future for you here." Cole was grateful for the opportunity and threw himself into learning the business side of ranching. The extra responsibility came with extra pay, which he saved carefully with a specific goal in mind. In December of 1882, as the first cold winds began to blow down from the mountains, Cole rode out to the Miller homestead with a small box in his pocket. His hands were sweating despite the chill in the air, and his heart was racing. Grace met him at the door, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Come in out of the cold. I just made coffee." Cole followed her inside, where a fire crackled in the fireplace, filling the small house with warmth. He accepted a cup of coffee, but could barely drink it, too nervous to focus on anything except what he was about to do. "Grace, I need to ask you something," he said, setting down his cup and taking her hands in his. Grace's eyes widened as if she knew what was coming. "Cole?" He got down on one knee, pulling the box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "I know we have not been together long by some standards, but I know my heart. I love you, Grace Miller. I love your strength and your kindness and your determination. I love the way you make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Grace's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Cole Maddox." Cole slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and hope he felt. Grace kissed him back fiercely, her fingers tangling in his hair. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you." Tom Westerly served as Cole's best man, and one of the women from town stood up with Grace. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Tom gave them 3 days off for a honeymoon, which they spent at the Miller homestead, now their home together. Cole moved his few possessions from the ranch bunkhouse, and they began their married life in the small house that had once seemed like a symbol of Grace's loneliness, but now represented their shared future. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, two people who had both known loss and loneliness, finding solace and joy in each other's arms. Grace had been married before, but Cole was her first true love, and he made sure she knew how precious she was to him. In the months that followed, they worked together to improve the homestead. Cole used his savings to buy lumber and supplies, and they expanded the house, adding a second room and improving the roof. Grace's garden flourished, and she began preserving food for the winter, filling shelves with jars of vegetables and fruit. They acquired 3 more chickens and another mule, and Cole started talking about maybe buying a few head of cattle to raise. Tom proved as good as his word, gradually transitioning Cole into the foreman position. The increase in salary meant they could think about long-term plans, about building something lasting. In June of 1883, Grace told Cole she was expecting a baby. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with delight, before carefully setting her down and asking anxiously if she was all right. "I am fine," Grace assured him, her eyes shining. "I am better than fine. I am happy." Cole placed his hand on her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing inside her. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Grace confirmed. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Cole admitted, "but also excited. We will figure it out together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and into the fall. Grace continued to tend her garden and manage the household, though Cole insisted on doing the heavier work. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she was eating enough and getting enough rest, until Grace finally had to tell him to stop hovering. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him with amusement. "I am not made of glass." But Cole could not help worrying. He had already lost so much in his life, and the thought of anything happening to Grace or the baby kept him awake at night. In February of 1884, during a cold snap that frosted the windows and made the ground hard as iron, Grace went into labor. Cole rode like fury into Copper Springs to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. Mrs. Henderson took charge of the situation with calm efficiency, sending Cole to boil water and fetch clean linens while she attended to Grace. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Cole paced the small house like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from the bedroom, his imagination conjuring every possible disaster. Finally, just as the sun was setting on the second day, he heard the thin wail of a newborn baby. Cole froze, his heart in his throat, waiting for some indication of what had happened. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom, wiping her hands on her apron and smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Maddox, and your wife is tired but doing well." Cole nearly collapsed with relief. "They are both all right? They are both fine. You can go in and see them now." Cole entered the bedroom on shaking legs. Grace was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up at him and smiled. "Come meet your son." Cole approached the bed and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small snuffling sounds. Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He is perfect," Cole whispered. "He is," Grace agreed. "I was thinking we could name him Thomas after Mr. Westerly. He has been so good to us." Cole nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Grace, the three of them forming a small circle of warmth and love. "Thomas Maddox," Cole said softly, "welcome to the world, son." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Cole discovered that fatherhood was both more exhausting and more fulfilling than he ever could have imagined. He would wake in the night to help Grace with feedings, walking the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, marveling at every tiny change and development. Tom Westerly was touched and honored when they told him about the baby's name, and he proved to be a doting honorary grandfather, stopping by regularly to check on the family and always bringing some small gift for Thomas. As Thomas grew from a newborn into an infant and then a toddler, Cole and Grace's homestead continued to prosper. They were able to buy a dozen head of cattle, which Cole tended carefully, building up the small herd. Grace's garden expanded, and she started selling her preserved goods in town, developing a reputation for quality that brought customers from miles around. In 1886, Grace gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Mary after Cole's mother. Mary had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her older brother everywhere. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Cole would rise before dawn to handle the cattle and maintain the property, then head to the triple bar for his foreman duties. Grace managed the household and the children, tended the garden, and ran her small business selling produce and preserves. In the evenings, they would gather around the table for supper, Thomas chattering about his day, and little Mary banging her spoon and laughing. On Sunday evenings after the children were in bed, Cole and Grace would sit together on the porch, watching the stars and talking about their dreams for the future. These were the moments Cole treasured most, the quiet intimacy of being with someone who knew him completely and loved him anyway. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked him one evening in the summer of 1887. "Giving up the drifting life to settle down?" Cole pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single second. I did not even know what I was looking for when I was drifting. But I know now. I was looking for home, and I found it with you." Grace turned her face up to his, and he kissed her properly, slow and sweet. Even after 5 years of marriage, the attraction between them had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect. In 1889, when Thomas was 5 and Mary was 3, tragedy struck the Triple Bar Ranch. Tom Westerly suffered a heart attack while out riding the range and died before anyone could get him back to the ranch house. The entire community mourned the loss of a good and generous man. At the reading of Tom's will, Cole and Grace were stunned to learn that Tom had left them 100 acres of the Triple Bar Ranch and 50 head of cattle. In his will, Tom wrote that he had no children of his own and wanted to ensure that the people he considered family were taken care of. "I have watched Cole Maddox grow from a drifting cowboy into a responsible rancher and devoted family man," the will read. "He and his wife Grace have earned everything I am giving them through hard work and good character. I know they will use these resources wisely and continue to build a legacy for their children." Cole and Grace were overwhelmed by the generosity. The land Tom left them adjoined Grace's original homestead, effectively doubling their property. With the cattle and the land, they now had the foundation of a real ranching operation. "He believed in us," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "Even when we barely believed in ourselves." "He was a good man," Cole agreed, his own eyes damp. "We will make him proud." They threw themselves into building the ranch, working harder than they ever had before. Cole hired 2 ranch hands to help with the expanding cattle operation. Grace continued her garden and preserving business, while also managing the household and raising the children. It was exhausting work, but it was also deeply satisfying. In 1891, Grace gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Samuel after Grace's first husband. Cole had suggested the name, wanting to honor the man who had brought Grace west and given her the start of the life she now lived. Grace had cried when he proposed it, touched by his thoughtfulness and generosity of spirit. Young Samuel was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn gray eyes. Thomas, now 7, was thrilled to have a brother, while Mary, at 5, was less impressed with another sibling taking attention away from her. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Cole's reputation as a fair and knowledgeable rancher spread throughout the territory, and people began seeking his advice on cattle and land management. Grace's preserves won prizes at the county fair, and she started taking special orders from families who wanted her particular recipes. By 1894, they had outgrown the original small house even with the additions they had made. Cole and Grace decided to build a proper ranch house, a 2-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a dining room, and a parlor. It took the better part of a year to complete, with Cole doing much of the work himself with help from his ranch hands. When they finally moved into the new house in the spring of 1895, Grace stood in the spacious kitchen and cried tears of joy and gratitude. "Do you remember the first day you came to dig the well?" she asked Cole. "I was so suspicious of your motives. I could not believe someone would help me without expecting something in return." Cole wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "And now look at us. We have a real home, healthy children, a successful ranch. We built all of this together. You gave me back my life that day," Grace said, turning in his arms to face him. "You gave me water, but you also gave me hope. And then you gave me love and family and everything I ever dreamed of." "You gave me all of that too," Cole said softly. "I was just drifting before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to put down roots. You made me want to build something lasting." They kissed, and even after 12 years together, the spark was still there, the connection that had formed that first evening when Grace had hugged him beside the newly dug well. The children came running in then, Thomas leading the charge with Samuel toddling behind, and Mary dancing around them both. "Can we pick our rooms now?" Thomas asked eagerly. Cole and Grace laughed and released each other. "Yes, you can pick your rooms," Grace said, "but no fighting about who gets which one." The children thundered up the stairs, their excited voices echoing through the new house. Cole and Grace followed more slowly, hand in hand. Life continued to unfold with its mixture of joys and challenges. In 1897, Grace gave birth to their 4th child, another daughter they named Elizabeth. By then, Thomas was 13 and already working alongside his father on the ranch, learning the business from the ground up. Mary, at 11, helped her mother with the younger children and the household duties, though she often complained she would rather be outside with the cattle. Samuel, at 6, was the dreamer of the family, more interested in books and drawing than ranching. Cole encouraged all of his children to pursue their interests, remembering how his own father had supported his curiosity and independence. The turn of the century found the Maddox family well established and respected in the community. Their ranch was one of the most successful in the territory, running several hundred head of cattle across their land. They employed half a dozen ranch hands full-time, and more during busy seasons like roundup and branding. Cole, at 44, had silver threading through his dark hair and weathered lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and capable. He had become a leader in the community, serving on the town council and helping to establish a proper school in Copper Springs. Grace, at 41, was even more beautiful than she had been as a young widow struggling to survive. The years of good food and security had softened the harsh angles of privation, and happiness shone from her eyes. She had become known throughout the region for her kindness and wisdom, and women often came to her for advice about marriage, children, and running a household. One evening in the summer of 1902, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset, Grace leaned her head on Cole's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, his arm around her. "About how far we have come," Grace said. "About that day you showed up with a wagon full of equipment and offered to dig me a well. I was so broken then, just trying to survive day by day. I never imagined I could have all of this." "I fell in love with you that first day," Cole admitted. "I did not realize it at the time, but looking back, I think I knew. I watched you carrying those buckets, so determined and brave, and something in my heart just recognized you." Grace lifted her head to look at him. "You changed my entire life. You literally gave me water in the desert, and then you gave me so much more." "You changed my life too," Cole said. "I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You made me want to be better, to build something, to create a legacy. Everything good in my life comes from that decision to dig you a well." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. In the distance, they could hear Thomas calling the hands in for supper at the bunkhouse. Closer by, Mary was singing to baby Elizabeth, her voice clear and sweet. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just ridden past that day?" Grace asked. "If you had decided it was not your concern?" Cole considered the question. "I think about it sometimes, and I realize how close I came to missing the best thing that ever happened to me. If I had been in a different mood, if I had been running late, if I had taken a different trail, any number of small things could have changed everything. I am grateful for every single choice that led you to me," Grace said. "And I am grateful you were the kind of man who saw someone in need and decided to help without expecting anything in return. That is who you are, Cole. That is why I fell in love with you." Cole kissed her forehead. "I did not expect anything in return, but I got everything anyway." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Cole reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about the young man he had been, drifting from place to place with no direction or purpose. He thought about the loneliness he had carried, the sense of not quite belonging anywhere. And then he thought about the moment he had first seen Grace, struggling under the weight of those water buckets, her determination evident in every step. He thought about the decision to help her, a decision that had seemed simple at the time, but had changed the course of both their lives. Digging that well had been the best thing he had ever done, not because it had led to this material prosperity, though he was grateful for that, but because it had led him to Grace. She was the water in his desert, the oasis he had not known he was seeking. Their love story had started with a simple act of kindness, asking nothing in return. And it had blossomed into something neither of them could have imagined, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, a family that brought them joy every day, a legacy that would outlive them both. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the natural progression of life. Thomas grew into a fine young man and eventually married a sweet girl from town named Sarah. They built a house on the far corner of the ranch property and started their own family, giving Cole and Grace their first grandchildren. Mary surprised everyone by marrying a traveling photographer who passed through Copper Springs, and they moved to San Francisco, where she helped run his studio and raise 2 children of her own. She wrote letters regularly, keeping her parents updated on her adventures in the big city. Samuel followed his scholarly inclinations and became a teacher, taking a position at the school his father had helped establish. He married the daughter of the town doctor, and they lived in Copper Springs, where Samuel could stay close to his aging parents. Elizabeth, the baby of the family, fell in love with a young rancher from a neighboring property. Her marriage united 2 of the largest ranches in the region, and she proved to have inherited her mother's business sense and her father's way with cattle. By 1910, Cole and Grace were in their early 50s and entering a new phase of their lives. They gradually handed over the day-to-day operation of the ranch to Thomas, though Cole still rode out most days to check on things and offer advice when asked. Grace had slowed down as well, though she still maintained a small garden and continued to make her preserves, more out of habit and enjoyment than necessity now. She spent much of her time doting on her grandchildren, who adored their grandmother and begged for her stories about the old days. One afternoon, Grace was showing one of her granddaughters how to can tomatoes when the girl asked, "Grandma, how did you and Grandpa meet?" Grace smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, sweetheart, I was in a very difficult situation. My first husband had died, and I was trying to survive on my own in a harsh land. The well on my property had dried up, and every single day I had to walk 3 miles into town to get water, and then 3 miles back carrying heavy buckets. I did that day after day after day." The granddaughter's eyes were wide. "That sounds really hard." "It was," Grace agreed. "I was tired and lonely, and afraid I would not be able to keep going. And then one day, your grandfather showed up at my house with a wagon full of equipment. He told me he was going to dig me a well, and he did not want anything in return. He said it was just the right thing to do." "And then you fell in love?" the girl asked romantically. Grace laughed. "Not right away. But yes, eventually I fell in love with him, because he was kind and generous and hardworking. He gave me water when I was dying of thirst, both literally and in every other way that mattered. He saved my life, and then he made my life worth living." That evening, Grace told Cole about the conversation. They were in bed, the windows open to let in the cool night air. Cole pulled Grace close, her head resting on his chest. "I like being the hero of the story," Cole said with amusement, "though I think you might be leaving out the part where you saved me too." "How did I save you?" Grace asked. "By giving me a reason to stop running," Cole said seriously. "By showing me what home could be, by loving me and building a life with me. I was lost before I found you, Grace. I just did not realize how lost I was." Grace kissed his chest, right over his heart. "We saved each other then. How is that for a story?" "Perfect," Cole said, holding her tighter. "It is absolutely perfect." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, comfortable and content after more than 25 years of marriage. The years of the 1910s brought changes to the American West. The frontier era was ending, replaced by more settled and civilized communities. Automobiles began appearing on the roads, electricity came to some of the larger towns, and the world was rapidly modernizing. But some things remained constant. The Maddox Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management. The family remained close, gathering regularly for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. And Cole and Grace remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with each passing year. In 1918, as the Great War raged in Europe, Cole and Grace celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the territory. It was a joyous occasion, filled with food and music and laughter. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Cole and Grace stood together on their porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, they turned to each other and smiled. 35 years, Grace said wonderingly. "It seems like both forever and no time at all." "Best 35 years of my life," Cole said, "and I am looking forward to the next 35. Grace laughed. "We will be in our 90s by then." "Then we had better take good care of ourselves," Cole said, pulling her into his arms. "Because I am not ready to be done with you yet." They danced together on the porch, with no music except the sound of the wind and the distant lowing of cattle. They moved slowly, holding each other close, two people who had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs together, who had built something lasting out of a simple act of kindness. As they danced, Grace thought about that young widow who had trudged along dusty roads carrying water buckets that seemed to get heavier with every step. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to abandoning her homestead and admitting defeat. And she thought about the cowboy who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had been too tired to voice, offering help without expectations or conditions. That single act of generosity had changed the trajectory of her entire life. Cole thought about the restless drifter he had been, moving from place to place without purpose or connection. He thought about how empty his life had been, even though he had not recognized the emptiness at the time. And he thought about the moment he had decided to help a stranger, not knowing that decision would lead him to everything he had ever wanted, but never knew to ask for. Their dance slowed and stopped, but they remained in each other's arms, reluctant to break the spell of the moment. "I love you," Grace whispered. "I have loved you since you got down into that hole in the ground and refused to give up until you found water for me. You have spent our entire marriage making sure I have everything I need, never asking for anything in return." "I love you too," Cole said, "and you were wrong about me not getting anything in return. I got everything. I got a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through everything life has thrown at us. I dug you a well and asked for nothing back, but you gave me the world anyway." They stood together under the stars, holding each other, two souls who had found each other in an unlikely place and built an extraordinary life together. The well Cole had dug all those years ago still provided fresh, clean water for the ranch. It had become a symbol of their love story, a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come from simple acts of kindness offered freely without expectation of reward. The 1920s brought continued prosperity to the Maddox family. The ranch expanded further, and Thomas proved to be an excellent manager who kept the operation running smoothly. Cole officially retired at the age of 65, though he still rode out regularly to check on things and offer his opinion when asked. Grace also stepped back from the more demanding aspects of running the household, though she remained the matriarch of the family and the person everyone turned to for advice and wisdom. She spent her days reading, tending a small flower garden, and being endlessly available to her growing number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They had been blessed with good health for most of their lives, and aside from the usual aches and pains of aging, both Cole and Grace remained vigorous well into their 60s. They took daily walks together around the property, holding hands and reminiscing about the years they had shared. One afternoon in the spring of 1928, Cole surprised Grace by leading her to the old well, the one he had dug for her 46 years earlier. It was no longer the main water source for the ranch, having been replaced by a more modern pumping system, but the family had maintained it as a historical landmark. "Do you remember the day I finished digging this?" Cole asked, his arm around Grace's waist. "I remember every detail," Grace said. "I remember you calling up to tell me you had hit water. I remember looking down into the hole and seeing the water pooling at the bottom, and I remember hugging you because I was so overwhelmed with gratitude and relief." "That was the moment I knew I was going to marry you," Cole said. "Right then, when you threw your arms around me, I had never felt anything like that before, like I had finally found the place I was supposed to be." Grace looked up at him, her dark eyes still bright despite the lines time had drawn on her face. "You know what I realized recently? We have been together longer than we were apart. My entire adult life has been intertwined with yours. I barely remember what it was like before you came into my life." "I remember," Cole said softly. "I remember being lonely even when I was surrounded by people. I remember drifting without purpose. And then I remember seeing you carrying those water buckets. And something in me shifted. I did not just want to help you. I needed to help you. And in helping you, I saved myself." They stood by the old well for a long time, lost in memories and gratitude. The sun was warm on their faces, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of spring flowers. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with life and activity. "We had a good run, did we not?" Grace said quietly. Cole looked at her sharply. "Had? We are still having a good run. We have got years left in us yet." Grace smiled, but did not argue. She had been feeling more tired lately, a deep weariness that did not improve with rest. She had not mentioned it to Cole, not wanting to worry him, but she suspected her time was running shorter than his. But she did not fear death. She had lived a full and happy life, had been loved well, and had loved in return. She had raised 4 children who had grown into good adults. She had built a business and a legacy. She had experienced joys she never could have imagined during those dark days of hauling water and wondering how she would survive. And most importantly, she had spent 45 years married to a man who had shown her every single day that she was cherished and valued. Cole had kept the promise he had made on her porch all those years ago. He had worked hard, treated her right, and done everything in his power to make her happy. What more could anyone ask from a life? As if reading her thoughts, Cole pulled her closer. "Whatever time we have left, we will face it together, just like we have faced everything else." "Together," Grace agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Always together." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their steps slower than they once were, but no less steady. Behind them, the old well stood as a silent testament to where their story had begun, a reminder that the greatest adventures often start with the smallest acts of kindness. Grace lived for another 3 years, passing away peacefully in her sleep, in the winter of 1931, at the age of 72. Cole was devastated by her loss, feeling as though a part of himself had been torn away. But he was also grateful for every moment they had shared, every laugh and tear and quiet evening together. He lived for another 7 years, remaining on the ranch surrounded by his children and grandchildren. He told stories about Grace to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory alive through his words. He spoke of her strength, her kindness, her business sense, and her unwavering love. And he always told the story of how they met, about the young widow carrying water for miles each day, and the cowboy who dug her a well and asked for nothing back. It became a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love often begins with simple generosity, and that the greatest treasures in life cannot be bought or earned, but are given freely from one heart to another. Cole Maddox died in the spring of 1938 at the age of 81, surrounded by family and at peace. He was buried next to Grace in the small cemetery outside Copper Springs, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together decades earlier. On their shared headstone, their children had inscribed a simple epitaph. He gave her water, she gave him home. Together, they built a legacy of love. The old well remained on the property, carefully preserved by successive generations of the Maddox family. It became a place of pilgrimage for descendants who wanted to connect with their history, to stand in the spot where their great-great-grandfather had literally and figuratively saved their great-great-grandmother's life. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear the echo of laughter coming from the old well, the sound of two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something beautiful together, proving that the truest love stories often begin not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with one person seeing another's need and choosing to help, expecting nothing in return, but receiving everything that mattered. The Maddox Ranch continued to thrive through the decades, a living testament to what Cole and Grace had built together. Their descendants remained on the land, ranching cattle and growing crops and raising families of their own. And they all knew the story of the well, the story of how their family had begun with an act of kindness that had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through the generations. It was a story about water in the desert, about survival and resilience, about two lonely people finding each other and choosing to build a life together. It was a story about the Wild West, about hardship and determination, about the kind of love that transforms both the giver and the receiver. But most of all, it was a story about the power of generosity offered freely, without expectation or condition. Cole had dug Grace a well and asked for nothing back, and in return, she had given him everything: her love, her trust, her partnership, and a family that would carry their legacy forward long after they were gone. It was, the family agreed, the greatest love story ever told, made all the more powerful because every word of it was true. And standing by the old well that Cole had dug with his own hands, looking out over the ranch that he and Grace had built together, their descendants understood the most important lesson their ancestors had left them: that true wealth is not measured in land or cattle or money, but in the love we give and receive, the lives we touch, and the legacy we leave behind. Cole and Grace Maddox had started with nothing but determination and kindness. They had ended with everything that truly mattered, and their story, beginning with a simple well dug in the Arizona desert, would be told and retold for as long as the Maddox family endured, a reminder that the greatest adventures begin not with seeking fortune or glory, but with seeing someone in need and choosing to help, with no thought of reward. That, their descendants knew, was the true measure of a life well lived. And it was the greatest gift Cole and Grace had given them, not the land or the ranch or the material prosperity, but the example of how to love generously, work hard, and build something lasting through simple acts of everyday heroism. The old well stood for over 100 years, a monument to where it all began. And though the ranch eventually passed out of the family's hands as the descendants scattered and pursued different lives, the story remained. It was written down, preserved, and shared, becoming part of the oral history of Copper Springs and the surrounding territory. Historians and romantics alike were drawn to the tale of the cowboy and the widow, the well and the love that grew from it. It became a symbol of the best of the American West: hardship overcome through determination, loneliness defeated by connection, and survival transformed into flourishing through generosity and love. And somewhere, in whatever realm exists beyond this one, Cole and Grace Maddox looked down on the legacy they had created and knew that their lives had mattered, that their love had been real and true and lasting. They had taken the raw materials of hardship and kindness and built something extraordinary, proving that the greatest treasures in life are not found but created, not taken but given freely from one heart to another. Their story ended where it began, at a well in the desert, but it was an ending filled with peace and satisfaction, knowing that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. And really, what more could anyone ask from a life? What greater legacy could anyone hope to leave? The answer, Cole and Grace would have said, was none at all. They had dug their well, both literal and metaphorical, and from it had flowed a lifetime of blessing. They had asked for nothing and received everything. And in the end, that was the truest measure of a life well lived and a love worth remembering.